mean for parents and policymakers. We're now joined by Vilana Barnard, who's a food scientist and researcher in food and nutrition security at Stellenbosch University here in South Africa. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be with you this morning.
Let's start at the beginning, the big picture. What inspired you and your team to investigate flavorings in baby and toddler foods sold in South Africa?
Okay, so what inspired us was really the lack of research in this area. So it's well known that babies and toddlers, they have a preference, an innate preference for sweet tastes. This comes from birth. It's just something that they're born with. And early taste experiences can shape this in their early months. So we noticed that there's a lot of research about sugar and sodium and things like that in these products, but there is a lack in the research area about additives like flavorings in these foods. So this is the main reason why we decided to do this research, is to shed some light on this gap that exists.
So what were the most surprising or perhaps concerning findings that emerged from your study?
So I think the biggest finding, what it all was about, was the fact that more than a third of the products that was included in our study contained flavorings. This is a concerning finding because in my personal opinion, based on what I've read and the concerns that are out there, the flavorings, it's questionable whether they should be in foods for babies and toddlers. And then furthermore, like you did mention as well, we did find that these products don't always comply with labeling regulations when it comes to flavorings, which can be misleading sometimes and influence parents and caregivers.
Perhaps I should have started with this question actually. When we talk about flavorings, what do you actually mean? Are we talking about artificial flavors or natural extracts, or maybe even both?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think it's good to clarify. We are talking about all types of flavorings. So you get artificial flavorings, natural flavorings, and also nature identical flavorings. So those are your three types. As far as we could determine, artificial flavorings aren't really present in baby foods. Natural and nature identical flavorings are. The concern with this is, though, there is some info out there that suggests natural flavorings aren't necessarily better than artificial ones, because a natural flavoring might contain a natural extract, but there are also other ingredients in a flavoring, carriers and preservatives and things like that. So the flavoring as a whole might not be natural. It's only the active compound that is natural.
Tell us about how flavorings at such an early age can actually affect a child's taste preferences and their relationship with food later on in life.
All right, so as I mentioned, babies have an innate preference for sweet tastes. So they will want sweet tasting foods. Now, most of the food on the market is sweet, and the flavorings are sweet, and it enforces this inborn habit that babies already have, which is a problem because it leads to them continuing to prefer sweet tastes instead of other tastes, savory and sour, and it prevents them from getting used to those tastes and flavors. And now the concern is that flavorings enhance this. They contribute to this in a negative way. So at the end of the day, we sit with a problem where children want flavored, sweet, artificial tasting foods instead of foods in their natural form. And these habits then we take into later life, and this could then lead to things like overweight, obesity, other non-communicable diseases, tooth decay even is a basic one. So there's a lot of concern around this and not enough research.
I think I need to talk to my mum about my sweet tooth then. So,
Me
um,
today.
let's talk a little bit about this food labeling, because you mentioned that there's violations in terms of not labeling foods properly. Why do you think maybe that there is this issue? Is it a lack of capacity to enforce, to check, political will, or just industry influence? What's going on?
I think it's a combination. I think there's really a lack of proper regulations in the first place. There are some, don't get me wrong, regulations to address foods for infants and young children. However, it doesn't address flavorings in these foods. So I think there's a gap there. It needs to be more specific. There's a lot of gray areas when it comes to regulations, which also leads to a problem because manufacturers interpret it differently and they can get away with it because it's not black and white. And then, yeah, I think limited capacity to regulate this is also a very big problem. So the manufacturers get away with it because it's not properly enforced. There are some regulations and some things in place, but if we don't keep them accountable, then they can just continue with labeling the things improperly and creating misconceptions and leading to misinterpretations by consumers.
Okay, perhaps finally, what message would you like the baby food industry to take from this study of yours?
I think the purpose of this study was to just create awareness for parents and for the manufacturers that we really value our lives and the lives of our children, and we want to give them the best possible future. So I think nutrition is a very important part of that. And I want to just emphasize how important it is for everyone to take accountability, whether it is from a manufacturing side or from a parent's or caregiver's perspective. To implement the regulations and for parents to actually look at labels and make an informed decision, read the ingredients and decide, do you want your child to eat this? And then, I want to also emphasize for parents, I know life is busy, but don't forget about home prepared food.
Fantastic. Villana, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That was Villana Barnard, food scientist and researcher in food and nutrition security at Stellenbosch University, with a very important warning for all parents of toddlers and young children to take this flavorings story pretty seriously.
New day, new stories. Start your morning right with Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
South Africa's Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Dr. Deon George, says there should be pronouncements on whether there will be funding for climate adaptation to enable the South African government to put proper response mechanisms in place. Minister George was speaking at the National Ministerial Stakeholder Consultation in Johannesburg in preparation for the 30th Conference of the Parties, or COP30, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to be held in Belém, Brazil next month. Tuto Ngobeni filed this report.
The 30th Conference of the Parties COP30 to be held in Belém, Brazil next month will mark a pivotal moment in the global climate agenda as parties are expected to submit their third round of nationally determined contributions NDCs under the Paris Agreement, reflecting enhanced ambition and action aligned with the outcomes of the first global stocktake. During his speech at the National Ministerial Stakeholder Consultation held in Johannesburg, South Africa, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Dr. Dion George, highlighted how adaptation is a top priority for Africa. This as the continent is already feeling the effects of a changing climate through extreme rainfall, flooding and unseasonal snowfall.
If we aren't going to get the money and the developing economies aren't going to get the money, then we need to have clarity on it. So we say, do as you say you will do. If there's going to be finance made available, then do it. And if the finance is not going to be available, then say it. And then we can know that we need to make an alternative plan. And we're very resilient people, so we're capable of doing many good things with very little, as we've done before. So I think that that's the frame of the finances. In the first instance, you promise this, do what you say. If you're not, say that. And then we can then consider what the alternatives are.
On the Just Transition Work Program, George says it must evolve into a practical instrument that supports inclusive and equitable transformation it needs to go beyond energy systems to address the full social and economic dimensions of transition. He says it's essential that nuclear is part of the country's energy mix.
As was mentioned earlier on, I think nuclear is just simply has to be part of the mix. In fact, it is part of the mix as we look at we need to have energy security in our country. I know that there are some very strong views on nuclear, some very positive, some very, very negative. But certainly, as I have mentioned in the past, is that nuclear is going to be part of the mix. It is one of those things. It's an important component, but it isn't the only component. And I think that's the thing. It takes a very long time. I mean, that appeal, I think, if I remember correctly, it was in the process for more than a decade. So it really was a very long time. But of course, there's a lot more processes that still need to go on.
Executive Director for the Presidential Climate Commission, Ndoro Modise, gave the consolidated key messages for Team South Africa to COP30. Modise says Team South Africa will stand on the issue of developed nations financing developing countries' mitigation and adaptation strategies.
It's very Article 9.1, which is about developed countries have a responsibility to finance developing countries' mitigation and adaptation. That 9.1 article remains on the agenda, especially in light of the poor outcomes of the new climate quantified goals on finance. While we should acknowledge progress made and the gap between NDC's ambitions and staying within 1.5, some of the things must be loudly highlighted. Fossil fuels must remain in the spotlight, including demanding increasingly strong language on the phasing out of finance subsidies.
Young people also presented their position ahead of the COP30. They spoke on how they continue to feel the effects of climate change with a high rate of youth unemployment. Representing the youth, Michaela Marie de la Rey called on a clear emphasis on climate adaptation through youth-led programs.
At COP30, we see an opportunity to exchange knowledge, strengthen policy frameworks, and secure youth representative in governance. South African youth are already experiencing adverse climate impacts, such as droughts in the Eastern Cape, floods in KwaZulu-Natal, and intense heat stress in Gauteng. Adaptation funding to climate change remains underfunded, and youth-led initiatives often lack adequate resources. There must be an emphasis on climate adaptation and resilience through youth-led projects.
For Channel Africa News, I am Tutongo Beni in Johannesburg.
Seven o'clock Central African time it is. Welcome to Rise and Shine. If you've just joined us here on Channel Africa, we now enter the second hour of the show, and my name is Asanda, Beda. We're looking at Botswana in this hour, having introduced a new rule aimed at boosting local ownership in its mining sector, among other stories.
Yes, we're also looking at elections in Ivory Coast. The news now with Onele Nsinzi and the sports headlines with Musibudi Makura following.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Tensions are escalating in Madagascar, where thousands of mostly Gen Z protesters have taken to the streets of Antananarivo, furious over the coup leader's appointment of the new prime minister. The demonstrations erupted after Colonel Michael Randrianarina, who seized power following the impeachment and flight of the president Andre Rajoelina, named a close military ally to head the transitional government. Young protesters say the move betrays promises of democratic reform and transparency, accusing the new military-led administration of tightening its grip instead of preparing for elections. Over 30 people are reported to have been killed in a fuel tanker explosion in Nigeria. The vehicle spilled petrol, which ignited after the crash at the central Niger state. The locals reportedly rushed out to scoop up the fuel, leading to their death at the site of the explosion. The BBC's Chris Ewoko.
Reports indicate that the tanker transporting petrol from Lagos in southern Nigeria to the northern part of the country skidded off the road and crashed. Officials from Nigeria's Emergency Management Agency told the BBC that they were responding to the incident but were unable to confirm the number of people affected. Local reports suggest that about 30 people have been killed, while 40 more sustained varying degrees of injuries.
Uganda's Electoral Commission has set the 15th of January as the date for the country's general election. President Yoweri Museveni is expected to extend his rule to nearly half a century. Now, Africa's fourth longest ruling leader, Museveni's government has changed the constitution twice to remove age and term limits, allowing him to remain in office since 1986. His main rival is expected to be 43-year-old pop star turned politician Bobi Wine. Wine, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, says Museveni won the last election through a ballot stuffing, intimidation of voters, bribery and other rigging tactics. Ruling party officials dismiss the accusations and say Museveni won through genuine support. South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party leader Julius Malema has questioned Police Minister Senzo Mchunu for soliciting an affidavit from attempted murder accused Vusimuzi Ket Matlala. Mchunu was placed on special leave, is appearing before Parliament's ad hoc committee looking into allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference in the criminal justice system made by the KwaZulu-Natal Police Province Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Amongst others, Mkhwanazi alleged that top police officers and Mchunu are involved with criminal syndicates. The committee has heard that Mchunu obtained an affidavit from Matlala, who faces attempted murder charges, to confirm that they have no relations. But Malema questioned why Mchunu felt the need to get the confirmation from someone who is behind bars.
Yeah, but who you get affidavits from is very important. You don't just get affidavit from questionable characters, especially people who are behind bars. That, as a minister of police, even if there's nothing legally wrong, you should just know it might raise certain questions, which gave, this situation we find ourselves in. Had you not solicited anything from Matlala, whereas in maximum prison where it should be difficult to access him.
And lastly, the International Court of Justice will render an advisory opinion later this morning on the obligations of Israel in relation to the presence and activities of the United Nations, other international organizations and third states in the occupied Palestinian territories. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution last December asking the World Court for an opinion on Israel's obligations to facilitate aid to Palestinians, including through states, international groups and the UN. The move followed Israel's banning of the operations of the UN's Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees from its territory over claims that UNRWA was infiltrated by Hamas, an allegation the UN has rejected, Sean Bryce Peace reports.
The General Assembly's move requesting an ICJ opinion came in response to Israel's decision to ban the operations of UNRWA from within its territory since late January this year and other obstacles faced by by other UN agencies in their aid work in Gaza. International humanitarian law requires an occupying power to agree to relief programs for those in need and to facilitate them by all means at its disposal. Israel's law did not stop UNRWA operations in the West Bank and Gaza, but by banning its operations within Israel, it affected its ability to work in the occupied Palestinian territory. ICJ advisory opinions are not legally binding, but provide clarity on legal questions and disputes.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Tsinsi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Arsenal beat Atletico Madrid 4-0 in the Champions League, while Russia banned as neutral athletes at the Winter Olympic Games. Details coming up at 7:30.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Ivory Coast heads to the polls this weekend in a tightly contested presidential election that could mark a remarkable political comeback. Among the 5 candidates is Simone Ehived Bagbo, the former First Lady, once dubbed the Iron Lady, who's vying to become the country's first female president. To help us unpack what this election means for Ivorian politics and the wider region, we're joined live by Professor Douglas Yates, political scientist at the American Graduate School in Paris. Professor Yates, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Simone Bagbo's return to frontline politics, it surprised many observers, but what does the candidacy signal about the current political climate in Ivory Coast?
Well, the first thing to know is that she wasn't supposed to be running for president. So the president, Alassane Ouattara, who's been in power for about 15 years, is running for a 4th term, and it's unconstitutional. But he has played the line in this match so long that it was expected that he would run. And his opponents were also fairly well known. His actual opponents, it wasn't Simone Bagbo, but Tidjane Thiam was the man who was expected to beat him, a man who has the support of the World Bank, of the United States, and who has the support of the south of the country. So Tidjane Thiam was eliminated. And then, of course, there's Laurent Gbagbo, the former president, the man who had run against Ouattara and had refused Ouattara's victory. He had been condemned, and his past condemnation also got him eliminated. So a poll had been done in September, and Tidjane and Gbagbo were both collectively over half of the vote. They were both eliminated. And as a result, the other people in the race were polling 4%, 2%. And so the first thing that Simone Gbagbo's campaign tells us is that this electioneering maneuver is being challenged. Because the problem for Ouattara is, although he was in the first round the number 1 candidate, when they did polls, and once again, this was just a month and a half ago, when they did polls on the potential 2nd round, he constantly lost against Tidjane Thiam. And that meant he got like 43%. Oh, this is a poll, but that meant that he doesn't have a reserve of votes. People in the north of the country and the center of the country will vote for Alassane Ouattara, but people in the south of the country won't.
But how competitive is this election then in reality, given what you have mentioned that several opposition figures were disqualified, President Ouattara is seeking a 4th term?
So what we've seen is an effort before the election to manipulate the results, kind of like what Donald Trump and the Republican Party are doing in the United States by eliminating voters, eliminating candidates. But when the actual vote is held, there's no indication that Ouattara's machinery is able to falsify the votes throughout the entire south of the country. So he's got support in the north. He's expected to take the north broadly because he was always the candidate of people in the north. But in the south of the country, if he tries to manipulate the ballots, there will be post-electoral violence. And that's the danger that's hanging over the head of anyone who's working a bureau de vote, who's working a polling station, is violence in the South, where ivoirité, where a sort of ethnic-based nationalism is powerful and explosive.
Ivory Coast is often described as an economic powerhouse in West Africa, being top producer of cocoa, but there's growing social frustration. So how central are economic and social issues to this election campaign?
All right, so a two-part answer to that question. First, things in the North have improved. The North was literally cut off from development during the period of Gbagbo's rule. And then also international sanctions had hurt the entire country. So on these two fronts, you had, when Ouattara came to power, 55% of the country's population was recorded as in poverty. That's been cut down to, as of this year, the most recent statistic was 37%. So a reduction of poverty has occurred. Of course, Ouattara's people are promising they'll cut it even further to 18%. We don't know. The percentages about the future are very unreliable. But there has been, in the macroeconomic scale, a lot of growth, economic growth. Now, that's not shared. This is always the problem, is you can have economic growth without proper sharing. So there's regional imbalances between the North and the South. And a lot of that growth was brought into the North, and that brought a lot of people out of poverty in the North. But people in the South don't see the growth. And they have this perception that they're being internally colonized by people who are not Ivoirien. That's the key concept. It's kind of like angry white man theory in the United States, explaining Trump voters. The disgruntled, formerly privileged Southerners have not been enjoying the fruit of growth.
Let's go back to Simone Gbagbo's return to frontline politics. What role do you think gender plays in this election, given that Ivory Coast has never had a female president?
Yeah, so the fact that Ivory Coast has never had a female president should be factored into the equation. My country, the United States, has never had a female president, and every effort to run one has come up against patriarchy. So we should expect that a lot of people who might have voted for Tidjane Thiam or Laurent Gbagbo won't vote for Simone because she's a woman. On the other hand, she'll get a lot and very quickly of international support. There's a kind of a joy about the idea of having a woman president of the Ivory Coast on the outside. Now, having said this, there's also the international war, the Cold War that's going on. So Alassane Ouattara, the current president, is seen as a French puppet. And that image is promoted on social media and by Russian bots, by Russia, who has been systematically trying to undermine the French position in Africa in response to France's efforts to undermine the Russian position in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So this portrayal of Ouattara as a French puppet also means that Simone Gbagbo is seen as the Kennedy of the Ivoirians against French neocolonialism. And so there might be a lot of people who wouldn't have voted for her because she's a woman, but who will because she continues to speak her ex-husband's discourse that the French are colonizers, imperialists, it's a neocolonial.
Professor Yates, we thank you so much for your very valuable insights. And, I think it's good evening for you there, but thanks for making time for us this morning.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Great. Professor Douglas Yates is political scientist at the American Graduate School in Paris, sharing his insights on the Ivory Coast presidential election and Simone Gbagbo's bid for the presidency. Interesting times.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
To Southern Africa now, where Botswana has introduced a new rule aimed at boosting local ownership in its mining sector. The amendment to the Mines and Minerals Act replaces the government's previous right to acquire a 15% stake in any mining concession. Under the new regulation, companies must now sell a 24% share in new mining projects to local investors if the state opts not to purchase a stake. Now, the Ministry of Mines and Energy says that the rule which took effect in October on the 1st. Our economics reporter Innocent Samosa has more.
Botswana, the world's top diamond producer by value, is keen to increase local ownership of its mineral wealth and to promote local value addition. With earnings from diamond sales hurt by weak demand and synthetic stones, the Southern African country has struggled to finance its budget and revenue fell 50% in 2024. But how does the new 24% local ownership rule impacting Botswana's ability to attract foreign investment, especially in a sluggish mining market? Kevin Totani is a political economist.
There's a good side to it in the sense that Botswana is one of the 30 most unequal countries in the world, according to my understanding. It's very unequal. The richest 20% of income earners in Botswana, they own about 60% of annual income. Right. So there's stark inequality in that country. And one of the ways to get that economy going is you have to make it not exactly equal, not exactly egalitarian, but you have to make it a little bit more equal. Right. And the downside to having this law now is that it must not delay new investments into Botswana, as some other people have been opining and complaining. Because with this law here, if it is not made to be flexible, it can curtail the inflows of foreign investment and even domestic investment within the economy. So what Botswana can do is they should at least try to make this law as flexible as possible.
He believes local investors have the ability to take up these stakes. However, there's a concern that the new rule could slow projects' development.
Well, look, local investors should have capacity to take some of the stakes within the new concessions, right? Mining concessions. But we can't guarantee that they have capacity to take all of the stake, right? But we also cannot rule out their inventiveness, their ingenuity, their innovativeness. They can reach out to international investors as well and make up some consortiums, and then they purchase that stake. They can go that route, that avenue, right? And in terms of now, this law delaying new investment, possibly it can.
Given the IMF's projection of another economic contraction in 2025, Tutani underscored the role of private sector partnerships in helping Botswana diversify beyond diamonds.
What immediately comes to mind, when I look at it, is that the government can go the way of blended finance. The government can partner with the private sector by showing the private sector that within certain key sectors of the economy, you talked about beef, you talked about tourism, within certain key, sectors of the economy, the government can say to the private sector, right, we are willing to go halfway with whatever investment you bring into these strategic sectors. And we don't want any return more than 5%, right? In terms of their profits, their financial returns as government.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Samos in Johannesburg.
South Africa stands accused of double standards in its foreign policy, preaching peace and human rights abroad, whilst at the same time profiting from the export of arms to countries accused of war crimes and ruled by military juntas. Now, a new report by the Southern African Litigation Centre titled The Great Hypocrisy of South Africa's Arms Exports reveals that weapons made in South Africa have been sold to states under military rule, from Myanmar all the way to Guinea, Burkina Faso, as well as Mali, and even to countries implicated in the war in Yemen, despite a High Court ruling meant to prevent such deals. Now, the report questions whether South Africa is living up to its own laws and values it champions on the world stage. Well, joining us to unpack this is Dr. Attila Kisler, who's an international justice cluster lead at the Southern Africa Litigation Center. Dr. Kisler, thank you very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good morning and thanks so much for having me.
So, perhaps in a sentence, what's the central contradiction your report, the great hypocrisy of South Africa's arms exports, exposes?
So there are three key pieces to our report. First, it discusses arms exports, like you already said, to countries that underwent a military coup. The second piece, major piece, are arms exports to a UN peacekeeping mission in Mali that at the time of the exports were reported already shut down. And the third piece is our arms exports to countries that are accused of having committed war crimes. And those two countries are Saudi Arabia and the UAE in that context. So those are the three crucial pieces of our report. And as we say in our report, arms exports are not neutral acts. They have the potential to perpetuate a conflict or contribute to human rights violations or even international crimes like war crimes. So South Africa, as the top exporter on the continent, has a specific responsibility, not only legally but also morally, when it comes to such exports.
Let's talk a little bit about South Africa's arms export regimes, which seems to be quite robust. You referred to the NCACC as the gatekeeper. In practice, what are the biggest weaknesses in how this gatekeeping works?
So what we have seen so far when we look at previous arms exports is that it's not so much the legal framework that is the problem here. Because if we look at the National Conventional Arms Control Act, you'll see it's actually one of the most strict legal arms export regimes globally. So we have seen in the past that the National Conventional Arms Control Committee has approved very questionable arms exports to very questionable buyers and specifically to specific countries. So in that regard, we call in our report for implementation of the law and the implementation of the criteria that are set out in the National Conventional Arms Control Act, that, for instance, South Africa or the NCACC cannot approve permits that will contribute to a repressive regime, or cannot approve permits that facilitate the arms exports that again go to countries that systematically violate human rights or fundamental freedoms. So in that regard, that's only one pillar of the legal framework. And since the order that SALC obtained last year in the High Court in Pretoria, in the case of my apologies. In the case of Myanmar, the court even further clarified that the NCACC has an obligation to suspend any existing permit if the buying country has underwent a military coup, what they called an unconstitutional change of government, or if the country is accused of having committed international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. And those accusations must be done by an independent UN mandate holder. And both these criteria, or at least one of them, have been met in the most recent arms exports. And we see that, for instance, in the reports that South Africa continues to export arms to Saudi Arabia and the UAE as if nothing happened.
So what you're telling me is that the country essentially is ignoring its own court orders, literally being in contempt of court.
I mean, that is the big issue that we are dealing with. This court order has been issued in July last year, so it's been more than a year. So this is where this issue leaves the realm of being just like a policy failure or like a decision-making issue, but it's now becoming a rule of law issue, and that is very concerning. So that's why we call on the National Conventional Arms Control Committee to implement the existing law in terms of the National Conventional Arms Control Act, but also in terms of existing orders, like the order from the High Court in Pretoria.
Have you been able to engage the National Conventional Arms Control, gosh, it's such a long word, the NCACC, to talk about your findings? And if so, what did they say?
Unfortunately, even after the order was issued, numerous attempts by SALC to acquire information about if any or how many permits were suspended after the order have remained unanswered. So we don't know how many permits have been suspended. But like I said, from the following reports, especially reports from this year, from the first and second quarter of this year, they show that arms again went out to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which strongly indicates that none of these permits have been suspended.
So what about the manufacturers themselves? They have valid permits and they know that they shouldn't be given these permits. What responsibility do they bear?
The corporations also have a responsibility under the Constitution and also under international law. We can't have corporations that hide behind the cloak of a permit by the NCACC if that kind of conduct, if that kind of export would be in violation of the Constitution or even contribute to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. I mean, that is it's like arms companies would like that if, let's say, we are dealing with a situation where arms companies now from South Africa would like to export arms to Israel. I mean, that would violate so many international laws and domestic laws. So we cannot have corporations just hiding behind these permits, and corporations, and we have seen this in other comparative jurisprudences, that corporations can be held accountable if their arms end up in the wrong hands or if they are being used for human rights violations or even international crimes. So this is nothing new, and corporate complicity is also another theory. It's been a legal reality.
Your report also emphasizes transparency and accountability. What have you found as the kind of information that's being withheld from public view in South Africa's arms export regime?
So in terms of the reporting, we see that there's very often a high delay in reporting. So if you look, for instance, at the annual report for last year, for 2024, that report was only published months after. Usually it's being published 5 to 6 months after that term has been concluded. So in that regard, it's also difficult for civil society or other organizations or other stakeholders to actually assess and critically scrutinize these kind of exports, because at the time the National Conventional Arms Control Committee has been reporting on these exports. Those exports have already left the country, so that makes it specifically difficult in these situations.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. But thank you very, very much indeed for your input and insights on this goings-on in the arms exports from South Africa, Dr. Kissler.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. That's Dr. Kissler talking to us about South Africa's exports in the arms arena, and they're not going often to places they should be going, and it looks like we're even defying court orders. We'll keep on top of that story for sure. It's 7:30, which means it's time for your news headlines. Good morning, Onelen Sinsi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Good morning, Peter. Looking at your headlines, tension is escalating in Madagascar, where thousands of mostly Gen Z protesters have taken to the streets of Antananarivo, furious over the coup leader's appointment of the new prime minister. South Africa's police minister, who has been placed on special leave, Senzo Mchunu, will be back in the hot seat before Parliament's ad hoc committee today. The committee is looking into allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference in the criminal justice system made by the KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. And Peru President José Aguirre has declared a state of emergency in the capital Lima to combat surging crime. The announcement follows protests last week that left one person dead and more than 100 injured. Channel Africa News, I'm Oneli Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
And now let's find out what's happening in the world of sports. Here's the latest with Musubudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Asanda. Very good morning from the sports desk. So South African all-rounder Marizanne Kamp starred with both bat and ball for the Proteas women's side as she played a key role in their fifth win at the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup over Pakistan last night. Now, the SA women crushed their opponents by 150 runs via the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method in Colombo, with Kamp also contributing 68 with the bat and then returning impressive bowling figures of 3 for 20 in a heavily rain-affected encounter. She says everyone in the team has made their contributions at this year's tournament, which bodes well going forward.
I think it was a very good performance with the bat. I feel like the way Wolf and Tsuneki set it up for us to come in and just have the head out. And yeah, I was a bit disappointed that we couldn't get the 50 overs in. But like I said, everyone's had a good head out now. Most batters have confidence. The bowlers have been bowling well. So yeah, everything seems like it's coming together.
All right, so it would have also seemed very hard to imagine Kamp as well as the team in this sort of form after they suffered a heavy and a humiliating defeat to England in their opening match of this year's tournament just a few weeks ago. She was, though, happy with just how they turned things around from that moment, and now even says they are happy to have made it to the semi-finals of the global tournament.
Yeah, look, we were very disappointed with that performance against England. We felt like leading up to this World Cup, our preparation has been very good. Luckily, like you said, we turned it around very quickly, and again, I think that's the hard work that we've been putting in behind the scenes. And again, I think that's the beauty of this team, where we've not been relying on one person, and more people are starting to click and putting in performances.
On to football news now. Arsenal blew Atletico Madrid away with 4 goals in a 13 second half minutes as the Gunners maintained their 100% record in the Champions League with a statement 4-0 victory last night. Now, just like they did against Real Madrid in April of this year, the Gunners dismantled Diego Simeone's defence on the perfect evening that saw 2 more set-piece goals and a double for Victor Gyökeres to end his 7-game Arsenal goal drought. Now, Arsenal dominated from the start to the finish and could have also been up at half-time. Eberechi Eze struck the bar and Declan Rice missed a good chance from the rebound, with Jan Oblak denying Bukayo Saka as well as Gyökeres either side of half-time with solid saves. Meanwhile, Manchester City were comfortable 2-0 victors over Villarreal as they registered their first away Champions League win at this year's tournament in over a year. Erling Haaland extended his extraordinary scoring streak, taking his season tally to about 15 in all competitions when rounding off Rico Lewis' reverse cross before Bernardo Silva was able to head Seville's delivery home before the half-time break. Now, Villarreal, who had not been beaten at home since March of this year, set up a defensive 4-4-2 system, but were so passive it played perfectly into Pep Guardiola's hands. Now, John Stones had a free role to step into the midfield as well as orchestrate, while Jeremy Doku as well as Savio gave their respective fullbacks a torrid night. And finally, athletes from Russia as well as Belarus will not be allowed to compete as neutral athletes in qualification events for next year's Winter Olympics in Milan and Cortina following a vote by the sports governing body on Tuesday. Now, the International Ski as well as the Snowboard Federation's decision means that unless a late change occurs, Russian as well as Belarusian skiers as well as snowboarders will not take part in the games, which begin officially on the 6th of February. In September, the International Olympic Committee, that's the IOC, said it would also allow Russian as well as Belarusian athletes to compete at the Winter Games under a neutral flag as well as strict conditions as they did at the Paris Olympic Games. But the final decision would then rest on the individual sports federation. Just last year, 15 neutral Russians as well as 17 neutral Belarusians accepted an Olympic invitation to compete at the Summer Olympic Games. Well, it's 7:36 a.m. Central African Time, and that's a wrap of your sports news on this hour of Africa Rise and Shine. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +27 11714 4459. I'm back with the final sports update on the show in the next hour. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The story that takes us to Zambia. There are two men actually that were sentenced to prison for the plot to kill the president with witchcraft. You go like, what? So these guys were arrested actually in Lusaka, and what was found on them was a live chameleon. Can you believe that? Animal tails and bottles of concoction. That law takes us back to 1914, which is the Witchcraft Act. I can imagine now arrested and they go to jail for the next 2 years. You know, I presume that when you get to jail, they get to ask you actually, what is it that you committed? Now, this is the first of its kind, by the way, for somebody to be arrested for such. They in Pemba, whenever they pass, hey, Chikanga, hey, Uloya, hey, Mulosi. And imagine here I am in these early hours of the mornings, I get to talk about witchcraft.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time.
Right, if you are curious and want to know what has been happening in the world of business, economics and commerce, well, stick around because right now it's time for your business update with Buntle Headbush.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Peter, and good morning. In our top business story this hour, the Sudanese pound has shed nearly 2/5 of its value after a de facto embargo on flights from the army's wartime capital, Port Sudan, into the United Arab Emirates disrupted the vital gold trade. The army relies on the UAE for hard currency from gold exports, but also accuses it of backing the rival Rapid Support Forces paramilitary in a 2.5-year civil war that's killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. The UAE, which denies backing the RSF but has increasingly fraught relations with the army-led government, stopped all commercial flights from Port Sudan in early August, driving the pound's value down from 2,200 to 3,600 per dollar. Nigerian fintech firm Moneypoint Inc. says it's raised more than $200 million in a funding round led by Development Partners International, DPI. This as it seeks to expand its digital financial services across Africa and beyond. The funding follows a string of product launches by the company, including MoneyWorld, a remittance platform targeting the African diaspora in Britain, and a bookkeeping tool for micro and small businesses. DPI, which led the first close of the round in 2024, says Moneypoint's combination of growth and impact made it a standout investment. The Port of East London in South Africa's Eastern Cape province has officially received the contracts to commence renovations, marking a significant milestone in the long-awaited redevelopment project. The $8 million construction project aims to revitalize the original marine structure and stimulate economic growth while also creating much-needed job opportunities. The tourism and local business sectors around Latimer's Landing are poised to benefit significantly from the revitalized marine yard, according to Port of East London manager Dr. Simpiwe Mthembu. The revitalization project will enhance the port's competitiveness with international standards.
This development charts a new course for Eastern Cape economy by supporting value-add industries such as tourism, and is in line with the business strategic objective to support the Port of East London as a key role player in the tourism sector within the province.
South African Reserve Bank Governor Lesitsha Kganyago says ratings agencies lowered the country's credit worthiness to sub-investment levels based on the expectations that debt would exceed 90% of GDP by 2025. He argues that given that the assumptions have not prevailed, there's room to review the country's credit rating. Kganyago was speaking at the virtual SA Tomorrow Investor Conference hosted by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange.
So we need a different conversation with the rating agencies. This is where you were in 2017 and 2020. You said this was the trajectory. Look at where we are. And so you are having then this combination now that we are having. Prudent fiscal, prudent monetary policy, a structural reform program that is underway that counts for something.
European plane maker Airbus says it's opened a second assembly line in China, increasing manufacturing capacity for its best-selling A320neo family of single-aisle jets. The company says this is its 10th final assembly line globally. It's located in the port city of Tianjin near Beijing and is set to be fully operational in early 2026. The Chinese Commerce Ministry says Airbus has committed to expanding its presence in China and contributing to China-France and China-Europe trade ties. Analysts say that since Airbus first announced its overseas expansion plans in 2022 and 2023, Washington and Beijing have plunged into a months-long trade war, leaving Airbus and some other European companies anxious to avoid offending either trade power. And now taking a look at the indicators, one US dollar in Nigeria is trading at 1,465 naira this morning. In Botswana, it's 13 pula 25. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 48. And in Zambia, it's 22 kwacha 60. Moving to the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 rial 37. In Russia, it's 81 rubles 12. In India, 87 rupees 98. China, 7 yuan 11, and South Africa $1 is trading at 17 rand 32 cents this morning. $1 is trading at 74 pence to the British pound and 85 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $4,139 per ounce, down a bit from yesterday's price, and platinum also down a bit at $1,516 per ounce this morning, while the price of Brent crude oil has inched up slightly to $62.33 a barrel. And those are your business news. I'll be back with another update in the next hour. For any business news stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Buntle Headbush.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Wake up to the essence of the continent. Rise and shine on Channel Africa.
Around 676 million women lived within 50 kilometers of a deadly conflict last year, and that's the highest figure since the 1990s. That's one of the key findings of the UN Secretary General's annual report on on Women, Peace and Security, released on Monday. Now, the report highlights the role that women play as peacemakers, describes how conflict affects women overall, and outlines the UN Secretary General's goals for the key agenda. Now, Channel Africa's Nhlanhla Mahlangu spoke to Pablo Castillo-Diaz, who's the policy specialist for Women, Peace and Security at UN Women.
The report has some alarming findings. In 2024, 676 million women lived within 50 kilometers of a deadly conflict. This is the highest number since the 1990s. So more women and girls are affected by conflict. We also found that rising military expenditure and exclusion of women from conflict resolution is not making our world safer, it's making our world more dangerous. We have the highest number of active conflicts since 1946. In 2024, almost 9 out of 10 peace processes had no women negotiators at all. Women accounted for just 7% of negotiators and 14% of mediators, despite overwhelming evidence that when women are at the table, peace agreements are more inclusive, more just, and more durable. Those peace agreements that are supported by the UN do a little bit better, with 18%, but still way below the 1/3 minimum target that the UN has set for itself, and the parity goal that the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women has set for the world. On top of that, wars are being waged on the bodies of women and girls with shocking disregard for international law. I would say even disturbing levels of cruelty. Civilian casualties among women and children quadrupled compared to just 2 years ago. Sexual violence in conflict rose by 87% in just 2 years, at least in those cases that are verified by the UN, which represent a small set of the actual problem. 58% of global maternal deaths take place in 29 crisis countries alone, and we think this could get worse because we have so much blocked reproductive health care, bombed maternity wards and hospitals, and a general backlash against women's health and reproductive rights. And on top of that, dwindling aid. Foreign aid has been dropping, and only 0.4% of aid to conflict-affected countries goes to women's organizations. These are the very groups that prevent violence, deliver life-saving services, build peace at the community level.
Such startling findings. What are some of the recommendations that are contained in this report?
Changing this very grim picture requires political will backed by resources, earmarked funding, quotas, targets, incentives, mandatory requirements. This is why these reports also a call to action to governments, the UN system, all peace and security actors to reverse course. So it asks for clear targets and quotas to ensure women's full, equal, and safe participation in peace and political processes. This is something that still doesn't happen. We have quotas in national and local deliberative bodies, for example, quotas for governments in some cases, but not really many quotas in peace and security decision making, whether peace processes or national dialogues and political transitions and these kinds of things. And the UN has said that they support a target of a minimum 1/3 of participants in UN-led peace processes. We've also set other targets that are not being met. At least 1% of official development assistance going directly to women's organizations in conflict-affected countries. At least 15% of the same ODA to conflict-affected countries going to gender equality as a principal objective. The report also asks for greater accountability, not just for conflict-related sexual violence, which is an issue that the world has been addressing with more robust measures and funding, even though this funding is also dropping now and conflict-related sexual violence continues unabated, but also to reproductive violence and to gender-based persecution and just broader violations of women's rights and atrocities that happen to women and girls in war. And it also calls for a redirection of resources away from arms and towards peace building and women-led recovery. This can include changes in employment policy, social protection systems, access to land, housing, inheritance and property rights, and reconstruction plans and post-conflict financing that transform women's economic security. At a more micro level, I guess at an easier level that perhaps doesn't require so much, we're asking for changes in bureaucratic requirements and risk thresholds in donor policies to allow small grassroots local women's organizations in conflict settings to have an easier path at accessing quality, flexible, and consistent funding. And finally, the report also devotes a great part of its contents to the need for a gender data revolution on women, peace, and security, because we still have lots of gaps in our knowledge, and we need to take women's experiences in crisis into account and make sure they're fully counted and fully visible.
That was Pablo Castillo Diaz, Policy Specialist for Women, Peace and Security at UN Women. He was speaking to Channel Africa's reporter, Tlantla Mahlangu.
Wake up to the essence of the continent. Rise and shine on Channel Africa.
A coalition of global second-hand clothing industry leaders and trade bodies has raised alarm over the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP's, handling of its circularity and used textile trade project. In an open letter, the group, led by the Ghana Used Clothing Dealers Association, accuses UNEP of relying on unverified data and rushing consultations on guidelines meant to distinguish between reusable clothing and textile waste, a move they warn could undermine global textile sustainability efforts. Joining us now to further discuss is Atobra Edward Brinkley, General Secretary of the Ghana Used Clothes Dealers Association. Atobra, thank you for joining us. Good morning to you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a bit of more background on the Ghana Used Clothes Dealers Association. What exactly do you do?
This association is a body for all traders in the second-hand clothing industry in Ghana. It coordinates with government agencies and also coordinate with stakeholders like the retailers, the middlemen. We have middlemen, we have the importers, and then suppliers.
So what essentially was this UNEP's circularity and used textile trade project meant to do, and what concerns do you have with it?
UNEP Circularity and Textile Use Trade project aims to define what is textile waste versus used textiles that can be traded. And also it's a global guideline for the trade of used textiles. However, if it's not done well, it risks international used clothing trade, which will affect millions of livelihood of Africans that rely on the trade for jobs and for access to affordable clothing. In Ghana, we have about 2.5 million Ghanaians who are directly into the trade. So if this is not reviewed and if it is rushed, it's going to affect livelihood. Yes, we recommend UNEP's commitment to textile sustainability. However, the global guideline must be built on transparency and inclusiveness, so that the process can be effective and equitable.
So essentially, the concerns that you have are that these current draft guidelines will risk affecting the second-hand industry in Ghana and in terms of taking away livelihoods. Is there another concern or risk as that it can pose to even other African countries and not just Ghana?
According to Kenya's reports, Kenya have about 2 million people who are also into the trade. And it's also going to affect Kenyans and so many African countries that are into the trade. And we are talking about livelihood that is attached to this trade. So if this guideline is not done very well, millions of people are going to lose their jobs.
What would you have preferred, and what level of consultation or engagement would you have liked to see from UNEP on this before releasing these guidelines?
What I want to see is that the consultation process was rushed with limited access to materials and the dominance of certain voices. So what we want UNEP to do is to not to rush the consultation process and not to finalize the process, but to also bring out the methodologies that they have so that we can all sit down and review the methodology. And also the definition of waste must be clear to all stakeholders. And these are the things that we are talking about so that we can align ourselves with the guidelines so that it will help livelihoods.
How big of an industry is this used second-hand clothing industry on the continent, and how are we doing when it comes to the second-hand textile sustainability efforts?
Industry in Africa is very huge. You know, in Ghana, about 93% of Ghanaians patronize second-hand clothing. And I think so is so many of the African countries that also have a higher percentage of people who patronize second-hand clothing. So in a nutshell, you could see that majority of Africans rely on second-hand clothing to for livelihood and to also put food on their table. It has taken so many people through school, and the industry is so huge that it's commands about $49 million in the industry. It's a huge industry in Africa that we need to take care of and to review these guidelines to help Africans.
What steps do you hope then now that UNEP will take to restore confidence and ensure that there is a fair, there's a transparent process going forward?
What we want to propose to UNEP is that they must involve independent and regionally grounded experts who are not biased, who are local traders. This will also involve people who are directly into the trade to define what is waste. For example, in Ghana, according to our research, which was conducted by Ghana Institute of Public Management Administration, GIMPA, in Ghana, conducted by Dr. Odonko, less than 5% of second-hand clothing are unsold. And even with that, people use that one for so many products like mops, like pillowcases, and so many things. So it creates even the less than 5% that are unsold, also creates more jobs for other people to also have their ends meet. So this project must be halted for global stakeholding so that we can also have transparency in data and be confident in the methodology that they are using.
Any plans to approach the EU Commission? This project is funded by them in case UNEP does not respond accordingly or on time for you. And what kind of support would you need to approach the EU Commission?
Yes, we've sent our open letters to them for review and to hold on with the finalization of the guidelines. So we are waiting for their responses.
All right. Thank you so much, Atobra, and have a good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Atobra Edward Brinkley is General Secretary of the Ghana Used Clothes Dealers Association, and they are raising an alarm over the UNEP's, or the United Nations Environment Programme's, handling of its circularity and used textile trade project as second-hand clothing industry leaders.
Eight o'clock Central African time. A very good morning to you. Thanks you so much indeed for tuning in to this, the third hour of Rise and Shine on Channel Africa, where we bring you the African perspective. We're broadcasting from our studios in Johannesburg in South Africa on www.channelafrica.co.za. I'm Peter Ndoro.
My name is Asanda Beda. In this hour, we'll be delving deeper into South Africa's Parliament's ad hoc committee, a committee that's looking into allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference within the South African police services. What that committee entails and what it means for the Madlanga Commission, which it runs parallel to, is what we'll be discussing with two guests. And of course, there'll be other stories that we cover. Let's get to our news update. Here's Onele Nzinzi at 8 o'clock Central African time. And then after Onele will be Musibudi with sports headlines.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Tensions are escalating in Madagascar, where thousands of mostly Gen Z protesters have taken to the streets of Antananarivo, furious over the coup leader's appointment of the new prime minister. The demonstrations erupted after Colonel Michael Radrianarina, who seized power following the impeachment and flight of President Andry Rajoelina, named a close military ally to head the transitional government. Young protesters say the move betrays promises of democratic reform and transparency, accusing the new military-led administration of tightening its grip instead of preparing for elections. Over 30 people are reported to have been killed in a fuel tanker explosion in Nigeria. The vehicle spilled petrol, which ignited after the crash at the central Niger state. The locals reportedly rushed out to scoop the fuel, leading to their death at the site of the explosion. The BBC's Chris Ewoko.
Reports indicate that the tanker transporting petrol from Lagos in southern Nigeria to the northern part of the country skidded off the road and crashed. Officials from Nigeria's Emergency Management Agency told the BBC that they were responding to the incident but were unable to confirm the number of people affected. Local reports suggest that about 30 people have been killed, while 40 more sustained varying degrees of injuries.
South Africa's Police Minister Senzo Mchunu is back in the hot seat today before Parliament's ad hoc committee. The committee is looking into allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference in the justice system made by the KwaZulu-Natal Province Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Amongst others, Mkhwanazi alleged that top police officers and Mchunu are involved with criminal syndicates. Mchunu has spent 3 days before the committee, during which he defended his decision to disband the political killings task team and denied having any links to Brown Mkhotsi and Vusimuzi Ketmatlala, who are alleged to be dubious characters. Last night, he shared his thoughts on factionalism in the police service.
The minister should not come across as leading a faction within the police service. The minister would actually need to work very hard to be seen to be above all these quarrels and activities.
I agree with you entirely, Honourable Member.
President Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa has appointed Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana as acting president from Tuesday yesterday, the 21st of October, until the 27th of October. The spokesperson Vincent Magwenya says this is in view of conservative international visits Ramaphosa is undertaking in the coming days. Deputy President Paul Mashatile will be on leave during this period. Ramaphosa's travel includes Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, where he will participate in a summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. He'll finish off in Switzerland. The presidency says the visits will advance South Africa's bilateral relations with the respective host countries, particularly in trade and investment. They will also enable South Africa to strengthen cooperation with partner states in global forums and contribute to the Ramaphosa preparation for the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg next month. Peru President Jose Jerry has declared a state of emergency in the capital Lima to combat surging crime. The announcement follows protests last week that left one person dead and more than 100 injured. Measures include restrictions on some constitutional rights, the deployment of the armed forces in patrols and searches, and shutting off access to electricity for prisoners. The declaration will last for 30 days. Jerry announced the measures in a televised message.
Fellow citizens, crime has grown excessively in recent years, causing enormous pain to thousands of families and also harming the country's progress. But now it's over. Today we begin to change history in the fight against insecurity in Peru. We're moving from defensive to offensive in the fight against crime, a fight that will allow us to recover peace, tranquility and the trust of millions of Peruvians.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, as well as at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Oneli Tsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, there were 43 goals, a red card, 5 red cards, as well as 6 penalties on the evening last night in the UEFA Champions League. And then Pakistan out of the World Cup semi-final contention after a rain-affected defeat by South Africa. Details coming up at the bottom of the hour.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Now, South Africa's suspended police minister, Senzo Mchunu, is back in the hot seat before Parliament's ad hoc committee today. Now, the committee is looking into allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference in the justice system made by the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Police Commissioner, General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Amongst others, Mkhwanazi alleges that the top police officers and Mchunu are involved in criminal syndicates. Well, to discuss this further, we're now joined by political analyst Professor Sipho Sieba. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Always good to talk to you. Welcome.
No, thank you for the invitation.
It's been quite a defensive show by Minister Mchunu so far in the hot seat. What do you make of what you've seen in terms of maybe even body language, but rhetoric that he's presented in defending his position?
Well, one must accept that he came across as comfortable, and his earlier posture was almost like he was there to educate members of parliament. But I think as soon as the whole process started, he realized that he's in the lion's den. But he has been very consistent in saying or refusing to accept that the disestablishment of the political killings task team was more an attempt to protect certain individuals who have been implicated in criminal activity. And what he wanted to do was to deal with that. And one must remember that one of the things that Mkhwanazi did indicate was the letter that he wrote had the makings of that letter being written by some people outside or being influenced by other people. And the minister stood his ground to say, I wrote that letter. And he sought to give a number of reasons. But those reasons themselves were somehow questionable in a sense that once you have too many reasons to explain your action, people begin to wonder which reason really is the one that ultimately drove you to making that decision. And among other reasons that he gave was first that the political killings task team, like all other task teams, was not meant to be never ending, that they are all time bound. And also that this task team was not within the political structure. So that was the first argument that he sought to advance. Then the second argument that he sought to advance was around the optimal use of the resources, that it made sense to him that the political killings were not the only killings. It would make sense for him to come up with a structure or a unit that look at all forms of killings, including the taxi violence or killings that relate to taxi violence, traditional killings, and all that. But that didn't seem to convince MPs, because one of the things that they raised around that argument is that why did he choose this particular task team? What about other task teams that exist? So they did not find comfortable with these answers around that reason. The third reason that they also raised a concern is the timing of the establishment or disbanding of this task team, because for them it seemed to coincide with the imminent arrest of certain people who have been implicated in criminal activity. So in a sense, they saw this as almost giving credence that this establishment was more about protecting the crime syndicate or the drug cartels. And so that became a concern for them, especially when this establishment or disbanding did not, it was not followed or did not follow what you may call a consultation with people who were engaged on the operations of this task team. They expected him to have at least have briefed the national commissioner, to have briefed the Lieutenant General Provincial Commissioner Mkonazi, but that did not occur. And if you are a minister, you want to make sure that there's a cooperation between you and the chiefs within the police force. And the fact that he did it without that consultation also left much to be desired in with regard to the MPs. So he advanced quite a number of reasons, but each reason that he advances also raises a number of questions.
At the heart of this, my understanding, is authority to act. I've always thought that ministers' jobs are to frame policy, not to run these institutions. And no matter which way you shake it, whether it's a task team or a unit, whether it's in an organogram or not, these are men in uniform. He's a civil servant. And I wonder if he has any authority at all to do operational things such as starting or disbanding a task, a unit such as this.
Well, I mean, clearly, there are very few people who are convinced with that by the argument that he advances. All the generals, at least those who are on the other side of this thinking, are very clear about that the minister has interfered, that he had no business in directing what police should do. And they are not saying this because they want to undermine the minister. They are saying this, that your responsibility ends with setting a policy. But when it comes to operational matters, it is our space. And also what you are also dealing with here is people who have been in the police force for donkey's years. So they understand how far they can go. And they are not even arguing about encroaching into ministerial spaces. But they do think that what we have here is not only encroaching, but also can board us around defeating the ends of justice. And we've also seen where another previous minister was also heard to be calling, or was seen to have been calling somebody who was implicated before the person was arrested. So it may be that we have gotten to a stage where ministers had acted and had almost intervened within the operational space. So Mkhunu may not be alone in that. But that matter is a matter that the MPs were very clear that here it is interference. Yes, we accept, and hence the continuous reference to what the Constitution provides. And you are quite correct that the ministers should not be engaged in operational space.
And perhaps finally, I am curious. You've previously warned about turf wars within the South African police. And we heard in the inquiry or the committee questioning how the police went to Minister Mkhunu's house, apparently to search, and the police that were there prevented the police that arrived from entering. That does tell us a lot, doesn't it?
Well, it tells you a lot. First, that the police should be working together. I mean, there is a very clear line that comes from the Constitution that theirs is to prevent and combat and investigate crime. So the other police have no business in stopping that process unless if the warrant of search was not obtained properly. So, but the notion of war is quite very clear. And this is also what Mkonazi wants, is that we're now getting to a stage where it was going to be possible or almost feasible, or not even feasible, that it was almost about to happen where the police will be turning on each other and in terms of shooting. And that would have been very problematic. And hence his justification on why he called that press conference on the 6th of July to say this was actually a cry for help, to say within the system is so corrupt that we're not able to deal with it. And therefore, if you undermine the entire criminal justice system, then South Africans will have no faith and confidence in the police, whether they arrest, whether they search. So I do think that these investigations, the commission, both and the other committee are doing a great job.
Professor Siepe, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for your time and your insights.
You're welcome.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Meanwhile, the South Africa's suspended police minister Senzo Mchunu could not produce evidence of threats he alleged were made by KwaZulu-Natal Province Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Mchunu is giving evidence before Parliament's committee about his alleged interference into police work to appease members of criminal syndicates who were facing arrest. Timakatso Leshoro has the details.
On his third day giving oral evidence, Police Minister Senzo Mchunu could not produce evidence he alleged proved he was being threatened by the head of the police in KwaZulu-Natal, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. During his testimony on Friday, Mchunu played an audio of a conversation between his chief of staff and Mkhwanazi, claiming it demonstrated threats by Mkhwanazi against him, but there were no such threats in the audio. Then he promised to bring the audio when the committee resumed on Tuesday, but even then, there was no audio of threats. Members of the committee, including leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Julius Malema, took issue with that.
You are putting it as if we should have the recording. The minister does not have a recording. He told us he's got a recording and he wants us to play. That's number one. Number two, he wanted us to listen to something he never listened to himself. That recording doesn't exist. There's that there was no such a recording where Mkhwanazi was threatening the minister. We must put it on record that the minister doesn't have that recording and therefore that recording doesn't exist.
Mkhunu's letter of the 31st December 2024 dissolving the Political Killings Task Team opened a can of worms no doubt the minister didn't anticipate. In response to that directive, which witnesses at the Matlanga Commission of Inquiry and Parliament's ad hoc committee have disputed its legality, resulted in Mkhwanazi calling a press briefing on the 6th of July this year, claiming that the country's police and judiciary had been infiltrated by drug lords with the involvement of politicians. One such alleged drug kingpin, Ket Matlala, arrested on a different matter, is alleged to have funded the political activities of the ANC, but Mkhunu has denied knowing Matlala, who was awarded a contract worth millions by the police before it was revoked. Mkhunu further rejected claims that Matlala contributed to any dinners or presidential campaigns on his behalf, asserting that he was entirely unaware of the alleged arrangements.
My understanding is that I have never met the person. The only time I got to talk more about Matlala other than coming across the name from newspapers and social platforms, it was on the 20th of December when we started talking to General Masimula about the contract. They say I get something of a lifestyle from, without naming what is it that I've ever received from Matlala, or what word has ever gone between me and Matlala, but they say he funds my lifestyle. It almost shocked me.
Mkhunu says when he instructed the PKTT to be disbanded immediately, he didn't mean at that instance, contrary to the evidence of the police chief who told the committee the minister breathed down his neck to dissolve the team.
No, the immediate doesn't mean immediate when he is not there. It only related to the decision that I had taken, and that would then be engaged in or on in those meetings that I was indicating.
Minister Mkhunu insists the PKTT was dissolved mainly because of budgetary constraints, not what he said in his letter that the team added no value. He confirmed that despite his instructions, the PKTT continues to operate.
From the author of the letter, what then becomes the status of the PKTT now?
There is a process of a discussion which has not been completed while PKTT continues to operate.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Dimakazo Leshoro in Johannesburg.
Now, to unpack all this, we're joined by Professor Khulufelo Rakubu, head of the Department of Law at the Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa. Professor Rakubu, thank you for making time. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Your reactions to his testimony, South Africa's suspended police minister Senzo Mkhunu, and more particularly on his reasons for disbanding the Political Killings Task Team, or PKTT.
I found his testimony very defensive, evasive, and selectively assertive. Where he constantly claimed authority over police decisions, but managed to avoid direct accountability and contradicted himself on key issues. And the testimony was also politically charged because he constantly reminded us that he got the backup or he got the support of the president. He consulted or communicated with the president. And from his testimony, it was potentially implicating because he contradicted the police commissioner's testimony, and that raises questions about transparency and legality. So in his testimony, he was assertive on authority. He reminded us on the legal powers to issue such directive, including disbanding the PKTT, constantly also framing it as a ministerial prerogative. As he claimed authority, he avoided responsibility because he said he had powers to disband, right? Yet distance himself from operational consequences, implying those to be Masamula's domain. So that is what I could pick. There were contradictions here. He leaned on the legality of his directive. He claimed he withheld information to protect whistleblowers and to avoid retaliations and compromising investigation. But one questions the nature of the letter or nature of the directive that came with an immediate, in inverted commas. Then now when you ask for a disbandment immediately, you suggest that every process should be on hold. Immediately means now. So when you claim to have whistleblowers in mind, there's no way you could have issued such a directive in the absence of a police commissioner or national commissioner, for example. You can't be ordering that it be immediate when you understand the complicity of the investigations around political task team. So he tried to evade, he tried to defend, and he tried to push his authoritative powers that he had all the powers to take such a decision.
What did you make of his shock that National Police Commissioner Fanny Masemula, in his testimony, confirmed that the Political Killing Task Team was still active?
Indeed, he was taken aback. He believed his directive was the order of the day. But that shows a breakdown in authority, that showed defiance, that also raises constitutional or legal questions. Remember, Masemula and Kwanazi came in to dwell on the constitutional mandates, wherein they repeatedly reminded South Africans of the powers of the commissioner, powers of the minister, your section 206, 207. I believe that is what provided them room for defiance, because they believe the minister cannot take operational decisions. Now, all these highlight issues of power struggle between your political leadership and police command. So his shock showed that he took a decision and police leadership was having none of it. They proceeded, and now we got to understand the magnitude of power struggles and defiance in the SAPS at the moment.
On the ad hoc committee itself, it's comprised of 8 political parties. They are represented in this body, 18 members. How does this contribute to a democratic and a thorough or transparent process and diversity, if it does, in your view?
It tries, if I were to say so, although one wonders if there will be no political biasness. It's a very contested space. It was a bit difficult in the beginning as we observed, political scoring here and there, but providing opportunities to all other parties to have an analysis or a say, it does assist, but one is interested in the outcome of this. What will be the subsequent steps to assist South Africans arrive or to push towards justice or to enforce the law or correct or suggest corrections. So it does assist, and still today we're still waiting to see if the nature of questioning, because yesterday they were a bit probing and confrontational, and also dwelt on, and it was a bit technical, legalistic, and accusatory as well, and skeptical. And also we appreciated demanding of clarity, pressing for accountability from the members. We're hoping that today can be also probing, can be also pressing for accountability and justification. Although we could pick the contradictions in the testimonies, but let's hope even today the process will unfold peacefully or seamless without political scoring, if I were to put it that way.
Talking of members, one of the prominent members of the committee is the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema, who's known for his very vocal anti-corruption stance. What do you think he brings to the group and the voice that he adds as far as South Africans see it?
Authoritative voice, confrontational voice, accusatory, straight to the point, if I were to say so, fearless. I could feel he openly reminded the minister or just assisted the House understand that the debate around this missing audio or the audio is unnecessary, which clarified the debate around audio, because he came in and put a directive into that to say we cannot be debating or asking of an audio. And immediately after that, there was never questions around an audio. The matter was simply clarified and closed that there is no audio. This is just an allegations, unsubstantiated allegation. There's no evidence of threats. Therefore, we cannot even be dwelling on the issues around an audio. And he also boldly highlighted the discrepancy where the minister is mentioning of threats or an existing audio, which it looks like or sounded like the minister himself never listened to it. So that provided clarity and assisted the committee to move to the next step seamlessly, so with that information in mind, that you can't come here and claim there were threats and claim there's an audio and promise this committee that you are also coming in. And he also assisted when it comes to the necessity for an affidavit. Why would you want to associate yourself with the Vusi Matlala, for example, to an extent that you contradict yourself, wherein at some point you claim to have issued or instructed your attorneys to meet with his attorneys? Then the contradictions around Matlala writing to his attorneys, at what cost, who advised that they should be writing, what is your interest, and where did you get this Matlala? And again, issues around verification or of the Brian Mokhotzi's allegations and the nature of relationship they have, and particularly on the letter that leaked. To what extent has the minister attended to the issue of verification of this leak, if he had the best interest for South Africans to come to this committee to provide clarity that now I understand as the minister, I've got all the knowledge in trying to verify how my official letter got leaked, because that is what has caused all these doubts around his testimony and so forth. Why didn't he take upon himself to find and clarify how the letter got leaked? So he did not, the House or the committee was assisted to understand that he did not even take it upon himself to try and bring evidence that I did not leak the letter. I sent to A and B and C, and the forensic investigators found that it was leaked from D to E. Then that would have assisted. So Julius Valema came in handy in that regard.
Professor, thank you so much again for your valuable insights. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Kulufelo Rakubu is head of the Department of Law at the Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa. 8:31 Central African time it is. Let's get our news headlines. Here's Onele.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Police in Uganda say a road accident involving two buses on one of Uganda's busiest highways has killed at least 63 people and left others injured. Cameroon security forces fired tear gas yesterday to disperse opposition party supporters protesting in the capital Yaoundé in the northern city of Garoua. This as tension rises over the outcome of the October 12 presidential election. And a UN report is warning that cuts in welfare are fueling support for far-right parties. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
It's time to find out what's happening in the world of sport, and we say good morning once again to Musibudi Rachel Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Peter. Good morning once again from the Sports Desk. South Africa's senior women's national football team, Banyana Banyana, will face the Democratic Republic of Congo in a crunch Women's Africa Cup of Nations qualified tonight in Kinshasa at 6 p.m. Central African time. So that's, of course, going to be South African time as well. So with both nations aiming now to improve on past campaigns, the two-legged tie marks a vital first step toward Morocco 2026. Now, South Africa's preparations received a boost with the arrival of Linda Motlalo, adding flair as well as experience to the squad that trained with intent since the weekend. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo hold a home ground edge for the first leg, but Banyana Banyana are determined to seize the momentum ahead of the return fixture to be played in Johannesburg as of next week. On to this now. There were 43 goals scored, 5 red cards handed out, as well as 6 penalties awarded, of which 5 were converted on one night in the UEFA Champions League. So it was relentless. It was rather a relentless evening of Champions League football on Tuesday. Last season winners Paris Saint-Germain hit 7 past Leverkusen, with both teams also having a player sent off, and the German side, Alejandro Grimaldo, missing a spot kick. Now, PSV Eindhoven, meanwhile, fought back from a goal down before running right in a 6-2 win over Italian champions Napoli, while the likes of Arsenal, Newcastle, as well as Manchester City all claimed convincing victories, with City's Erling Haaland scoring his 12th consecutive goal of the season. On to some cricket news now. South African all-rounder Marizanne Kamp starred with both bat and ball for the Proteas women's side as she played a key role in the 5th win of the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup over Pakistan. Now, the SA women's side crushed their opponents by 150 runs via the Duckworth-Lewis Stern method in Colombo, with Kamp also contributing 68 with the bat and then returning impressive bowling figures of 3 for 20 in a heavily rain-affected encounter. She says everyone in the team has made their contributions at this year's tournament so far, which bodes well for the ongoing tournament and, of course, going into the semi-finals of the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup.
I think it was a very good performance with the bat. I feel like the way Wolf and Tsuneki set it up for us to come in and just lay it out. A bit disappointed that we couldn't get the 50 overs in. But like I said, everyone's had a good hit out now. Most batters have confidence. The bowlers have been bowling well. Everything seems like it's coming together.
It would have been seemed very hard to imagine the Kamp as well as her team in this sort of form after they suffered a heavy defeat to England in their opening match just a few weeks ago. She was happy with just how things have turned around for the team, and of course now heading into the semi-finals.
Yeah, look, we were very disappointed with that performance against England. We felt like leading up to this World Cup, our preparation has been very good. Luckily, like you said, we turned it around very quickly, and again, I think that's the hard work that we've been putting in behind the scenes. And again, I think that's the beauty of this team, where we've not been relying on one person, and more people are starting to click and putting in performances.
And finally, athletes from Russia as well as Belarus will not be able to compete as neutral athletes in qualification events for next year's Winter Olympic Games in Milan as well as Cortina, following a vote by the sports governing body on Tuesday. Now, the International Ski as well as the Snowboard Federation's decision means that unless a late change occurs, Russian as well as Belarusian skiers as well as snowboarders will not be able to take part in the Games, which begin officially on the 6th of February 2026. In September, the International Olympic Committee, also known as the IOC, said it would allow Russian as well as Belarusian athletes to compete at the Winter Games under a neutral flag and strict conditions, as they did at the Paris Olympic Games, but the final decision would rest with individual sports federations. Just last year, 50 neutral Russians as well as 70 neutral Belarusians accepted an Olympic invitation to compete at the Olympic Games. And that's a wrap of your sports news this morning on Africa Rise and Shine. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. I'm back with more sports news with the On the Move team in the next hour. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The story that takes us to Zambia. There are two men actually that were sentenced to prison for the plot to kill the president with witchcraft. You go like, what? So these guys were arrested actually in Lusaka, and what was found on them was a live chameleon. Can you believe that?
Animal tails and bottles of concoction. That law takes us back to 1914.
Which is the Witchcraft Act. I can imagine now arrested and they go to jail for the next 2 years. You know, I presume that when you get to jail, they get to ask you actually, what is it that you committed?
Now, this is the first of its kind, by the way, for somebody to be arrested
for such. They in Pemba, whenever they pass.
Hey, Chikanga! Hey, Uloya! Hey, Mulosi!
And imagine here I am in these early hours of the mornings, I get to talk about witchcraft.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time.
Now let's check in with what's happening in the world of business. Here's Buntle Headbush with our economics news.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Asanda, and a very good morning to our listeners. In our top business story this hour, speakers at the virtual SA Tomorrow Investor Conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, have highlighted the country's economic resilience, which has been supported by growth-enhancing reforms, fiscal prudence, and data-driven monetary policy decisions. The conference serves as a platform for global investors to hear about current policy developments and market fundamentals that can help to inform investment decisions. Delivering the opening address, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized that structural reforms are taking hold while stable governance is yielding a positive response from markets.
Through private-public partnerships, we are unlocking finance for infrastructure, including mass public work. We are expanding and broadening the areas of our reform process to drive transformation, to build critical skills, and to expand opportunities for all businesses. We are strengthening the regulatory environment and improving the ease of doing business. Our financial sector regulatory regime remains amongst the world's most robust, bolstered by strong institutions and an independent judiciary.
The Port of East London in South Africa's Eastern Cape province has officially received the contracts to commence renovations, marking a significant milestone in the long-awaited redevelopment project. The $8 million construction project aims to revitalize the original marine structure and stimulate economic growth while also creating much-needed job opportunities. The tourism and local business sectors around Latimer's Landing are poised to benefit significantly from the revitalized marine yard, according to Port of East London manager Dr. Simpiwe Mthembu. The revitalization project will enhance the port's competitiveness with international standards.
This development charts a new course for Eastern Cape economy by supporting value-add industries such as tourism and is in line with the business strategic objective to support the Port of East London as a key role player in the tourism sector within the province.
Nigerian fintech firm MoneyPoint Inc. says it's raised more than $200 million in a funding round led by Development Partners International DPI. This as it seeks to expand its digital financial services across Africa and beyond. The funding follows a string of product launches by the company, including MoneyWorld, a remittance platform targeting the African diaspora in Britain, and a bookkeeping tool for micro and small businesses. DPI, which led the first close of the round in 2024, says MoneyPoint's combination of growth and impact made it a standout investment. European plane maker Airbus says it's opened a second assembly line in China, increasing manufacturing capacity for its best-selling A320 neo family of single-aisle jets. The company says this is its 10th final assembly line globally. It's located in the port of Tianjin near Beijing and is set to be fully operational in early 2026. The Chinese Commerce Ministry says Airbus has committed to expanding its presence in China and contributing to China-France and China-Europe trade ties. Analysts say that since Airbus first announced its overseas expansion plans in 2022 and 2023, Washington and Beijing have plunged into a months-long trade war, leaving Airbus and some other European companies anxious to avoid offending either trade power. And now for a look at the indicators. $1 US in Nigeria is trading at 1,465 naira this morning. In Botswana, it's at 13 pula 25. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 48. And in Zambia, it's 22 kwacha 60. Moving to the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 rial 37. Russia, 81 rubles 12. In India, it's 87 rupees 98. China 7 yuan 11, and South Africa $1 is trading at 17 rand 32 cents this morning. It's down a bit from yesterday's 17 rand 28 cents. $1 is trading at 74 pence to the British pound and 85 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $4,139 per ounce, platinum at $1,516 per ounce. Both are a bit lower from yesterday morning, while the price of Brent crude oil has inched up a bit to $62.33 a barrel. And those are your business news. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Bontle Hetbush.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Wake up to the essence of the continent. Rise and shine on Channel Africa.
We have about 15 minutes to go before we say goodbye here on Rise and Shine. But let's take a look at the story. 8:44 Central African time it is. The United Nations World Food Programme, the WFP, says food supplies into Gaza have increased since the U.S. brokered ceasefire came into effect. However, aid deliveries remain far below the levels needed to address the worsening humanitarian crisis there. Channel Africa's Lebogang Mabange reports on the situation as the World Food Programme calls for more access and the opening of all border crossings.
After weeks of limited access, the World Food Programme says food assistance is finally reaching parts of Gaza following the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But despite the progress, the agency warns that only 2 crossings are open and 8 deliveries are still well below target. Abie Itifa, Senior Regional Communications Officer and spokesperson for the World Food Programme, explains.
So far, we've had over 6,700 tons of food. That's enough for close to 500,000 people for 2 weeks. Daily deliveries continue, and they are now averaging around 750 tons. That's much better than what we had before the ceasefire, but it's still well below our target, which is around 2,000 tons every day.
Itifa says communities have responded positively to the ongoing relief efforts, with vulnerable groups among those benefiting the most.
The response has been really overwhelming. People are showing up in large numbers, grateful for the efficiency of the delivery of food assistance, as well as the dignified way of people standing in line, quickly getting their food rations, and especially impacting the most vulnerable, the women, female-headed households, the elderly.
Despite the slight improvement in aid delivery, the WFP says many families continue to ration what little food they receive, fearing that supplies could once again run out.
People are hopeful. There is cautious optimism, but the food that they are receiving, they eat part of it and they ration and keep some of the supplies for emergency because they are not very confident how long the ceasefire will last and what will happen next.
Itifa says while the ceasefire has helped reduce prices, many in Gaza still cannot afford to buy food, making the continuation of peace critical to preventing famine in the north.
We've seen reports that, because supplies are getting in, the food prices have dropped, but not to the level that it can be affordable. There's still a huge problem of access. People, can find food in the market, but it's out of reach because it's extremely expensive. Sustaining the ceasefire is vital. It's the only way we can save lives and push back on the famine in the north of Gaza.
Meanwhile, scenes of piled up waste scattered across various areas of the Gaza Strip as concerns are growing over mounting health and environmental risks as municipalities face major difficulties in managing solid waste following the destruction of infrastructure and the loss of access to the two main dumping sites on the outskirts of the enclave. In an effort to address this crisis, the United Nations Development Programme (UNDP) has intensified its work to organize and manage these temporary sites as part of its broader efforts to support Gaza's reconstruction and improve health and environmental conditions for residents. Jaco Celius is the UNDP resident representative in Palestine.
So UNDP is also working very actively in solid waste management. It is a major challenge for the rebuilding of Gaza, but also for making sure that health and environmental issues are addressed. How the solid waste is managed at the moment is very problematic because the two main dumping sites on the outside perimeter of Gaza is not as accessible anymore. So unfortunately, many temporary waste sites have to be created. There's 47 such waste sites. UNDP manages how these sites are set up, so it protects the population. As you can see, unfortunately, internally displaced people are living very close to these sites, but we also rehabilitate it. So we make sure that it is covered and make sure that the diseases cannot spread to the population.
According to Celius, unfortunately, many internally displaced people are living close to these sites, but they are working to rehabilitate and cover them to prevent the spread of diseases in surrounding areas. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, South Africa has seen a sharp rise in cannabis-related psychiatric problems amongst adolescents, cases that have more than doubled since 2017. And that's according to Professor Olekan Ayo Yusuf, who's the head of School of Health Systems and Public Health at the University of Pretoria. He links the surge to changing perceptions after cannabis decriminalization and the growing popularity of vaping among young people. He warns that those with existing mental health challenges are most at risk. We'll explore what's driving these trends and what can be done now. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Peter, and good morning to your listeners.
So, Professor, you say that cannabis-related psychiatric problems among young people have more than doubled. What, in your assessment, are the main driving factors, you think, behind this sharp increase since 2017?
Yes, thank you. We basically seen a lot of what seems to be self-medicating. Generally, there's about 1 in every 10 adolescents estimated to have one mental health disorder or the other, whether it's depression, anxiety, or even suicide ideation. And we believe that since 2017, given the data from hospital admission related to cannabis related psychotic admission for children moving from 35% to 65%. A couple of things which were still being investigated, but a couple of observations could explain this. One, globally, there is an increase in the potency, the THC, which is the compound in cannabis that makes people high, and is the one that's the component associated with psychosis. There's an increase in the potency in the plant material over the years. Secondly, we also see that post-2017, it might be that there's an increase in access to young people. There was a vacuum after the ruling. No age limit was put on that private use. So there seems to be a misunderstanding that private use by adult means private use by everyone. Until the legislation was passed last year for the private use purpose, cannabis for private use purpose, we then placed 18 years as that limit. The third thing that could be driving this is that people are having earlier access, and we know the risk for psychosis increases phenomenally. In addition to your genetic predisposition, if you're exposed to cannabis THC before age 15, your risk of psychosis increases phenomenally. And lastly, with vaping, you can actually potentiate your cannabis use if you had nicotine, because they actually give you the same feel-good hormones. So if you cannot smoke cannabis in public, you can then add vaping to it. It allows you to have that feel-good for a longer time. So the combination of the vacuuming policy to control cannabis and vape aggressive marketing has led to the situation we have.
How has the decriminalization of cannabis changed young people's perceptions of the drug, perhaps in terms of risk, acceptability, and even experimentation?
Indeed, in South Africa, we've not directly measured the perception change, but globally, the literature says since every country or every state, for example, in the United States that's gone through the decriminalization or legalization process, there have been an increase in normalization of cannabis use. So we emphasize that similarly in South Africa, because of that vacuum since 2017 to 2024, when the Act came into being, there was that vacuum that seems to have increased the normalization of cannabis. Once it was announced that you have the right to possess cannabis for private use, even though it was for adults, but there was no explicit age limitation in that ruling, and therefore you had this more children. And our data shows that 50% of the university students we studied had tried cannabis between the age of 12 and 17. Which is much younger than the age 18 that is in current legislation. And we also know that your brain develops fully only until the age of 21. So if you are exposed to THC before age 21, you're more likely to have a mental health disorder from THC.
Wow, that's quite sobering. The concept of a reverse gateway effect has come up in your work. How should we understand that in the South African youth context? Not just the classic gateway into cannabis and other drugs from cigarettes, but perhaps alternative pathways?
Indeed, traditionally, nicotine has always been the first drug of use for in many communities, both in South Africa and globally. However, with the decriminalization and legalization, which makes it easier to access cannabis, we are seeing more adolescents and young people starting with cannabis and actually moving on to nicotine. So that's the reverse gateway that we describe in our data. Interestingly, those who start with vapes were more likely to delay cannabis use for about a year or two, but once they started using cannabis, they were more likely to keep the two rather than replace it. So vape is not replacing cannabis, nor cannabis replacing vapes. The challenge is vapes there's no regulation currently for vapes. So you can use vape anywhere, and there's also no age limitation. So that's why it becomes easier for people to then have vapes, unlike tobacco smoking, which has a restriction. They can then vape anytime to make their cannabis effect much more prolonged.
We've run out of time, but very briefly, if you could answer this final question for me. Maybe there are young people listening right now who may be experimenting with vaping, cannabis, and other substances. What key message would you like to give them in terms of mental health risk and seeking help if needed?
So I think essentially many youth think this would help them, obviously, to control their mood. Nicotine can give you a temporary calming effect, but the long term is that you're dependent and it could worsen your mental health. So young people should think twice that it may be borrowing peace from tomorrow, but the debt always comes due. So I would say speak out. Parents in particular should talk early and focus on mental well-being, because what we are saying is that it seems like there is a big mental health problem for which these young people are using the substances to self-medicate. Government should pass the Tobacco and Electronic Delivery Systems Bill, which seeks to regulate vaping, because we also now seeing these THCs being put as a flavor. And finally, we need to integrate mental health prevention programs in school with support of law enforcement people, because law enforcement agents, we cannot arrest our way out of this situation. We need clear regulation and honest dialogue.
Professor Ayo Yusuf, thanks so much indeed for this important research. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and it's time to find out what's happening in the world of On the Move after the news. Good morning, Benjamin.
Hey, how's it doing, guys?
Morning.
Okay, I've got 1 minute to try to do this. Let's look at what we're looking at today. Psychology always has kind of new terms. Have you guys noticed? And the interesting one that we're going to be looking at is one called attachment styles.
Oh, I was going to say, especially when it comes to relationships, these terms come up. And there we go. Attachment styles.
Yeah, that's how you prefer kind of connecting with someone. Apparently, they are multidimensional and people approach them very differently. So we're going to be finding out what attachment styles are.
Do you know what yours is?
I don't know. I'm just going to learn today.
Do you want to know?
No.
Okay. Do you know what yours is, Peter Ndoro?
I don't even know what an attachment style is.
I know mine. I've got an anxious attachment style. I'll explain to you. I tend to overgive. And I tend to panic if somebody pulls back. So I'm learning through my healing journey to not do that, to relax about things.
That's interesting. Well, there's your psychologist there.
Yeah.
Hey, it's 9 o'clock.
Let's get our news then. And goodbye from us then on Rise and Shine. Asanda, Beda.
And Peter Ndoro.
Onele Nzinzi, over to you.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Looking at your top stories, Uganda accident leaves over 60 dead, and U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to overhaul the country's refugee resettlement process. Your latest news, I'm Onele Nzinzi. Police in Uganda say a road accident involving two buses on one of Uganda's busiest highways has killed at least 63 people and left others injured. The crash happened just after midnight on the highway between the